It is Women on Wednesday, and I think it's only fair today to start with a discussion of Stacey Abrams' State of the Union rebuttal last night. I thought she did a great job. It's always such an interesting dilemma, I think, this is going to sound weird, but they have to be thinking about what facial expressions to be making when they're saying certain things. Like, that's part of what goes into the planning and the practicing and all of that. For bigger speeches. Certainly if you're doing something relatively small, you're not worried about every smile of your face or every quirk of your lip. But when you're doing something like that that's televised, to the whole country, that's part of it. And it's hard to find that balance. And I think she did a pretty good job of finding that balance of when to look serious and when to kind of smile a little bit. I think a lot of people, a lot of politicians, anybody who does public speaking can sometimes mess that up, because if you're smiling too much, either it looks fake or it looks condescending. Some people just have like smirky smiles that look condescending. She doesn't really. She has sort of a pleasant smile that doesn't look too fake, too condescending, either one of those two things. So I thought she did a good job of just her poise, if you will, and the speed at which she went through the speech and the tenor that she used. And I liked the fact, at first I was a little bit confused when she started with talking about her family. At first I was like, what are you talking about here? Are you running for something or what's going on? But then she got to the point pretty quickly. And I, on reflection, I think I liked the fact that she personalized her rebuttal by, talking about her own family, but also as what it means to be sort of a good citizen, a good neighbor, a good friend, a good family member, and what that means. And that's sort of who we want to be as Americans. And that sort of led to some of her more important points, I think, throughout this speech. The thing that's getting the most attention from her today was how I think, forthright she was in her criticism of the shutdown. Of the government shutdown. So let's just listen to a little piece of that.
Just a few weeks ago, I joined volunteers to distribute meals to furloughed federal workers. They waited in line for a box of food and a sliver of hope since they hadn't received paychecks in weeks. Making livelihoods of our federal workers a pawn for political games is a disgrace. The shutdown was a stunt engineered by the President of the United States, one that defied every tenet of fairness and abandoned not just our people, but our values.
So I think, there's a lot of interesting stuff in there. I mean, she went flat out, called it a disgrace, said it was engineered by the president and that it was a stunt. And all of those things are true. But I also like that she didn't have to go too far beyond that in the criticism of him. I think she sort of let the situation be the criticism. Because, look, if you weren't somebody that was furloughed, think about this. You're somebody who has a good job, who works for a living, and you are forced by the circumstance of the shutdown to stand in essentially a welfare line to get a box of food. I don't know about you, but I know plenty of people, and I would say that I'm probably among them, who are too proud to do that. And that you don't resort to that until you have no other choice. So that all the furloughed workers who could have used that food probably didn't even line up for it because they didn't want to be humiliated that way. And the ones who didn't do it easily. The ones who did it with a heavy heart. So the repercussion for the American families who were affected by the shutdown, whether they were contractors or the workers or their families, is not only financial, it's emotional. It's psychological. To be minimalized in that way as a pawn, not even for a good reason, not even for something that you did yourself, or that was done to you as an individual where you could be mad at somebody. It was like, I'm a pawn in someone else's game, and that is taking away my dignity. My dignity. Not just my money, my dignity. And I love that she very eloquently, I think, drew that picture for us. So that was great. And then the other thing I thought was interesting is that Stacey Abrams, I don't even know if this was entirely on purpose, but made a parallel between the way states run, in particular our state here in Georgia, and the federal government. But I think you could apply that to states in general versus the federal government. Listen to this little bit.
For 7 years, I led the Democratic Party in the Georgia House of Representatives. I didn't always agree with the Republican speaker or governor, but I understood that our constituents didn't care about our political parties. They cared about their lives. So when we had to negotiate criminal justice reform or transportation or foster care improvements, the leaders of our state didn't shut down. We came together and we kept our word. It should be no different in our nation's capital. We may come from different sides of the political aisle, but our joint commitment to the ideals of this nation cannot be negotiable.
One of the things I love about that bit from her is that because she doesn't work in the federal government currently, like they could have picked someone else who was a junior senator or a congressperson to do the rebuttal, but because they chose Stacey Abrams, who's not a federal politician, she could sort of criticize the entire sort of federal level without it seeming weird because she's not a part of it. And I thought that was actually kind of great. But I liked what she did there by talking about what the state does and can do and how states operate versus how the federal government operates. Because in my mind, I ended up extrapolating that further. The president, for example, took credit for a lot of things, many of which he doesn't really deserve full credit for, maybe some credit, but not full credit. For example, the low unemployment numbers. Those numbers have been on the decline since the Obama administration, and the trend continued under him, and the numbers are great. So he gets credit for maintaining it, as Michael Bauer said earlier in the show, but not full credit. But he also took credit for wage growth. And first of all, he said that there was a significant amount of high wage growth among blue collar workers. I'm not quite sure that needs a fact check. But he doesn't really get full credit for that because while it may have happened under his watch, it's the states and the cities actually that are far more responsible for wage growth because they are the ones that have raised the minimum wage in their areas. And that is in large part why why wage growth is happening in the lower socioeconomic rungs is because minimum wage has gone up. In fact, the president has not raised the minimum wage in any way federally. So I liked her bringing the stateness into it because I think that illustrated a bigger point.